This mother bear and her two cubs are exposed to the ice-cold Russian winter. The bear planned to cross a big lake, but made a bit of a miscalculation. The swim was a bit further than she thought, and the mother was, of course, much better at swimming than her two young were. She realized she wasn't going to make it with her two cubs, so then she had to make a choice, and her primal instinct kicked in. Before we start, can we get this video to 1,000 likes? Please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Before we tell this story, we need to provide some information on the location of the incident. The lake the mother bear and her two cubs tried to cross is Lake Vygozzero. This is an enormous freshwater lake in the north of Russia, where it gets really cold during winter. It would be impossible for human beings to survive being in this ice-cold water, even if it was just for a few moments. In the wild, it's all about surviving. For these pair cubs, this was made clear at a very young age, because they trusted their mother blindly and followed her into the ice-cold lake. They didn't have a choice, because without a mother, they would be helpless and vulnerable. Unfortunately, the mother bear was a little too optimistic and brought her cubs into mortal danger. The lake she wanted to cross was too big. This led to a heart-wrenching decision. At first, there doesn't seem to be a problem. Mother bear and her cubs jump into the water and swim a good long way towards the other side of the lake. Soon, though, it becomes clear that the two cubs can't keep up with their mother. They try their best and use all of their strength, but the distance between the mother and the cubs grows bigger and bigger. When the mother notices she has lost her cubs, she turns back so the cubs can cling to her to not drown in the lake. The cubs aren't strong enough yet, and they can't finish the journey. The crossing is going to end very sadly. It should really be the other way around, and usually that is the case in nature. A mother should sacrifice herself for her cubs, but this mother doesn't have a choice, unfortunately. She can't keep the cubs on her back, and they can't finish the journey on their own either. The mother bear only has one option: keep swimming and leaving her cubs behind. It's shocking and unimaginable, but sometimes there's no other choice. In nature, everything is about surviving after all. Of course, the bear first tried to save her young, but it was no use. The current in the lake was too strong for her to stay afloat with the extra weight of her cubs. The current pulled her away from her young, so she had no choice to keep swimming and bring herself to safety. Whether the young would make it, she didn't know. After a lot of exertion, the bear reached the other side of the lake and managed to get on land. So what happened to the cubs in the meantime? When they were separated from their mother, they screamed and used the last of their strength to keep up with her. However, the distance kept growing bigger. The cubs were unable to make it in the ice-cold water with the strong current. They barely had the energy to keep their heads above water. They clung together to stay afloat together. There would have to be a miracle for them to survive this ordeal. It's hard to imagine what the cubs must have felt at that moment. They must have been incredibly frightened, since they were hardly able to keep their heads above water. They might not think in the same way as us humans do, but bears definitely have feelings too. The cubs had to fight for their lives, and their movements became more uncoordinated by the minute. All hope for survival started to disappear. By chance, a fishing king discovered the cubs in the water. Of course, the bears couldn't call for help like we would be able to do. Nevertheless, one of the fishermen discovered the two cubs and tried to get to them with the boat. The cubs reacted immediately and started to swim towards the boat, knowing they'd be able to cling to it. They knew this was their only chance for survival because they couldn't hold on a moment longer in the ice-cold water. The fishermen immediately noticed the bear cubs weren't doing well and that they needed help. Although they weren't sure how they'd be able to help the cubs, they did know they couldn't just leave them. The smaller the distance between the bears and the boat became, the clearer it became the bears' situation was very dire. The fishermen tried to handle as quickly as possible. There was one issue though: what if the bear cubs would become aggressive once they were on board? After all, bears are powerful animals, and they are known to get very aggressive at times. The boat wasn't very big, so there wasn't a lot of room, and this might lead to the bears feeling cornered. That thought was shoved aside though, because something needed to happen if they didn't want the bear cubs to die. One of the cubs came to the edge of the boat and started to climb up on its own, but it was in vain. It didn't have enough strength left to climb into the boat on its own, since the edge of the boat was too high. Exhausted, he let himself slide back into the water. The fisherman came up with an idea. They grabbed a net and tried to push up the cub, but the animal was simply too heavy. Not only did the fishermen try everything they could think of to help the bears themselves also used their last strength to get into the boat. They used their razor-sharp teeth to bite into the ropes around the boat to pull themselves up. It was no use, though. What was left to do? Even when the cubs seemed to have a little hope again, the rescue attempt didn't seem to be enough. No matter what the fishermen tried, nothing seemed to be enough to save the animals. The cubs still hadn't gotten onto the boat and had to desperately try to stay afloat in the water. Luckily, being able to hold on to the edge of the boat helped a lot already. The two fishermen didn't want to give up, though, because they had already taken the bears into their hearts and couldn't bear leaving them behind. However, the situation was still very dire. One of the fishermen came up with the idea to use a landing net. The bears were forced to trust the humans. The fisherman and the cub looked each other in the eyes. It was as if their souls were connected for just a little bit, and the small bears seemed to say, "Please help us, we just want to live." It was clear, human and animal had to trust each other. The fisherman wanted to save the cubs no matter what, but try making that clear to two young bears who are completely panicked. Both parties needed to trust one another, but this wasn't very easy. Yet the fishermen persisted, and with the use of their landing net, they'd managed to get the first bear safely on board. The second cub tried to cling to the boat with all that it had, but it didn't have enough strength left. It wasn't able to climb into the boat like its brother. The joy the fishermen felt about saving the first cub didn't last very long. Would they be able to save the second cub? While the first cub was lying in a corner of the boat, completely exhausted, the fishermen pulled all the stops to try and get the second cub out of the water. This turned out to be more difficult than they thought, and time was running out. The second cub was stuck in the net for a long time and didn't have enough strength to get out. Plus, the nets were meant for fish and not for the weight of an entire bear. Nevertheless, the fishermen did try. After a short time, it became clear that the second cub really was too weak to get into the boat by itself. It had exerted itself too much and wasn't able to move a muscle anymore, not even when it was almost over the edge of the boat. The fishermen didn't want to touch the bear, either because bears, even when they're small, have big claws and teeth and can react unpredictably, especially when they're stressed. That's why the fishermen started to encourage the cub and tug on the net. But it was no use. The cub was too heavy. The idea came at the very last minute. A net was thrown around the bear to attach it to the boat that way. Then they supported the cub underneath his bum with a landing net, so his weight was somewhat divided. With this construction, the fishermen managed to guide the cub along and move the boat, with the cub attached to it, to the bank of the lake. Both brothers were now safe. The cubs both fell asleep very quickly, unaware of what was happening around them. They would be seeing their mother again very soon. When the fishermen saw how much the bear cubs were shivering, they decided to not just leave them on land, but to search for the mother bear as well. She couldn't be far, after all. It was clear to the fishermen that they couldn't simply abandon the cubs. There were foxes and other wild predators in the area as well, and those might see the cubs as prey. First, they had to find a suitable spot to take the cubs off the boat. They didn't know how the mother bear would react when they saw her. A grown-up bear is very big and dangerous. Nevertheless, the fishermen carefully steered towards the spot where the mother bear was. Luckily, everything went off without a hitch. The mother bear somehow felt the fishermen didn't mean any harm and had saved her cubs. She hid in the background and waited until the boat moored. Meanwhile, both cubs were wide awake because, although they were still tired, they knew very well that their mother was close by. The two bears climbed off the boat themselves and got onto land. The two fishermen understood they needed to get out of the way, and they slowly steered the boat away. As soon as the fishermen steered away, the mother bear ran towards her young. It was clear how much joy she felt at the sight of them. The bears weren't the only ones who were happy. The fishermen were also relieved the bears were reunited again. They had saved the lives of the small bears. They would be able to gain back their strength now. Of course, it's not always clear whether humans should interfere in nature, or if they should just let nature be nature. But should the fishermen have just let the bears drown then? What do you think?